in my early 20s and we were first friends, I had the opportunity to go home with you for a visit. And I will never forget the way your family greeted you. I mean, your parents just huge open arms, like as if you were like a long lost cousin, Mish. And they just held you like heart to heart, soul to soul.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. I'm your coach, Misha McKittrick. I'm so grateful today. As you know, this is a podcast where we believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do. And where we also believe that we can find hope in dark times and that love will always prevail if we let it. I'm excited to share this episode with you because I reached out to my listeners and invited them to record this live podcast with me. And it was such an amazing experience to be able to see faces of people that I'm talking to each week and people who are really diving into this story and finding hope and healing. And it's so incredible to hold that space and to sit with each other. People were given the option to ask whatever questions they wanted, to discuss concepts or whatever. And it was just such a cool conversation to jump in and to dive into. If you're new to this podcast, in the first season, we're really diving into a story from my past. We're reading from my journal from when I was 15 and pregnant. And I went through some challenging years that are truly representative of the struggle of life and what we all deal with as we move through and just try to navigate and figure out life. So if you're listening for the first time, welcome. And you're more than welcome to go back and catch up on the story. Either way, we're glad to have you. And you guys, a couple of things to know before we jump into this conversation. First, make sure you hear the end. It was so full of love. We started just by going through, kind of the regular of what we do for the podcast every single week. We read an entry together and then we kind of talked about background and broke down a concept from the entry. And then we moved into being able to just have a discussion with each other. And literally, I know I've said it, but I just want to illustrate how much I'm cheering for you, how much I'm sitting in this chair and sharing this story to try to help you through your life and through your challenges, and just to help you feel like you have someone to talk through life with. As we move into the part of the conversation where listeners are talking and, unmuted, just know that there is life in the background. There is one person talking in particular that has some noises from a child in the background, and you need to know that there is another adult with that child. That child just really loves her mama. So just know that so that you don't have to have any concern in the background for you, and you can really just listen to the story. All right, let's jump in.
December 1st, 1994. Why me? He had the perfect daughter, and I tried to be a perfect wife. I hope one day he will regret all of this. Tonight, I tried to call him, and this chick named Vicky answered and said he's asleep and doesn't want to be bothered, and that they didn't go to work. Someone called around 5 o'clock. My dad answered, and they hung up. Shelley and Taylor and I went to Milford to visit Gina and Paul. They moved into a trailer and are buying it. On Monday, I'm going to file for a divorce from this terrible, sick, wrong, degrading man. I think he has cheated, had an or many affairs, committed adultery a number of different times, and then came into our bed and slept with me. He makes me sick. I won't forgive, and I will never forget. Kaylee is 8 months old. She has said mama for about 2 months and just said bye-bye for the first time on November 28th. She is so cute. A day in the life. So a few things I think are interesting is, and I was kind of talking with my sister about this, about how interesting it is that I still somewhat have a little bit of a question in my mind, like, I think he's cheated. I think he's had affairs when there's all this evidence. And we were also talking a little bit about her role in this and how much manipulation was really happening, you know, because the last time we talked about how my sister had sort of caught him in the act and then he threatened her, if you heard the episode. And we just talked and kind of dove in a little bit about how the manipulation works. And do you remember how I thought I caught him and then he tried to like create another situation for me? That I was cheating on him, and then it actually, what I didn't even realize is that it was also deflecting off of him. It was deflecting attention off of him as like such a tactic. And yeah, I remember feeling really messy in this time, but I also remember feeling a lot of like power and like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I don't really care. I'm going to call these women. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to ask them all the things. I'm going to do it. And I wasn't really afraid of doing that. You know, I remember feeling that. And I remember also going to file for that divorce. I remember going into a lawyer's office with my dad. And then, you know, he talks me back out of that in that moment. And you'll see in 2 more entries, more things develop, and you'll see kind of the direction it kind of retakes before that kind of is finalized. And sometimes I think it's important to remember that, you know, life is such a process. All that we can do is like one day at a time, even though in that moment I knew that I was like, you know, I said, I'm going to file for a divorce from this terrible, sick, wrong, degrading man, right? Like I knew that the circumstance that I was in wasn't good, but it's such a process. And I remember my dad at that point also giving me advice. Actually, I think that this came a little bit later, but it's good for me to share. And he said, I want you to write in your journal. And that's why we're going to see like in entries to come. He said, I want you to write in your journal how you feel when you're with him. Because I want you to reflect back at it as a whole. And it's interesting that we have a tendency to remember things differently than maybe they are. And so it's really important to write down the things as we're going through them, because reflection helps us to see the whole picture, helps us to look at everything involved. And yeah, it's a really big tangle of yucky yarn. And sometimes I think that we can get caught up in really, really hard times and we end up losing hope, or there might be reasons why we feel like we're crippling or that our knees are buckling and right out from underneath us. And I think it's important to remember, like, how do we remain hopeful in hard times? Like, what is it that we're doing when we're struggling or when we're facing adversity? And how do we move forward? How do we grasp when there's something that's facing us? And I'm looking at your faces, and I know a lot of your personal inside struggles. And I just want to remind you that when you feel, or if you feel hopeless or powerless, that there is something that you can do to rebound from adversity and to find hope. And so I want to talk to you and to start out with this topic of hope by sharing with you something that's called the Stockdale paradox. James Stockdale was one of the highest ranking officers to be held captive as a POW during the Vietnam War. Imprisoned for 8 years, while he was being held, he formed ways that fellow prisoners could communicate during isolation treatments, and he instituted rules to help fellow prisoners deal with the torture that they all received. He became a beacon of hope for all that were held with him. On reflecting on the mindset that helped him endure his trials as a prisoner, he said, "I never lost faith in the end of the story." He said he knew he would make it out and that he would turn the experience into the defining event of his life. Stockdale was then asked, "Who didn't make it out?" "Oh, that's easy," he said. "The optimists." The interviewer was confused, thinking that Stockdale was an optimist based on what he had previously said, and he asked, "The optimists? I don't understand." Stockdale then explained, "The optimists. They were the ones who said, 'We're going to be out by Christmas.' And then Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And they would say, 'We're going to be out by Easter.' And then Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving. And then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart." The Stockdale paradox asks you to look at the reality of your situation without adding despair. It asks you to see the situation for what it is, but instead of falling into the negativity of it, to continue in the belief that you will prevail. And so I look at that and I think, like, what did he see? He saw the end of his story. He saw the end of his story. And so I think that's a really powerful thing, that even in this moment, the end of my story, I could see myself getting a divorce. And maybe that was pulling me through. Or maybe the end of my story was bigger than that, was more than that, But I think that we have to check in and ask ourselves what it is that we're seeing. Because if we're seeing despair and we're just only seeing that, and that's where we exist, and even if we can only improve it to 1 degree, at that moment, maybe I only saw myself getting a divorce from him. Maybe I never saw myself sitting in this chair being able to affect other people's lives by sharing the story that I was living. And so if you don't already see the end of whatever your story is, know that you can create the end of your story to be something very incredible. Because I am a believer that no matter what you're left with, no matter what you go through, no matter what you're facing, at the end of the day, you are still you. And sometimes you have to recover, but you're still left with something inside of you that's a gift that you possess, something that you can share, something that no one else has the power to take from you, something that even still builds in you when you feel like you've given it all that you could at the end of the day. And you always have the ability to share your story and to be with the people in your path and to make the world a better place because you do so. And so I like to break down hope. I like to think about hope as not an emotion that is so easily something that we can check into, but something that's a byproduct of something else. So if you really sit down and you think about what feeds hope, usually there's a first emotion, right? Like hope is that byproduct. And so sometimes when we sit in the gratitude of what our past trials have done for us, it helps us see hope up for the trials that we are in. and that maybe that they will bring something similar to us like the other trials brought to us. And if we can sit somehow and find even just the little pieces of gratitude as we go through our story, it builds so much power to build hope inside of our hearts. I have a girlfriend who is facing a trial right now, and I talked with her today, and she shared with me how she's even been making herself skip from room to room to try and choose a better feeling. And sometimes that's just how it is. We're just doing our best to feel a little better, to improve the feeling that we have inside of our heart a little more and a little more and a little more, until we can see that that's actually going to be what contributes to helping us be restored into feeling like ourselves again, and to feeling like and believing that these trials are here to help develop us, to help us be stronger, to have more compassion, to be able to have a more rich human experience. And again, sometimes we don't know, all of the ins and outs behind our trials. And sometimes what feels like a blow, Garth Brooks' song when he says, he thanks God for unanswered prayers. And so sometimes, the trials that actually hurt and show up in our life sometimes turn out to be like that blessing in disguise, that we never really knew. And it's all just in our perspective and finding the trust. And I think whenever we look back to the trials that we've experienced in our life, and when we can develop a true, real vein of seeing that they did make us stronger and they did make us better and they helped us to grow in whatever ways and very concrete ways, then we can gain more trust, because it's very difficult to see that inside of the trial that we're in, and just to find hope, to find gratitude. But if we can go to the trials that we've experienced in the past, we can develop trust for the trial that we're in. And then inside of that, we can start to gain little bits of gratitude that develop the byproduct of hope, that develop a thought, a simple thought that this is going to make me better, or that this is somehow change our mindset into seeing a bigger picture, right? The end of our story, like Stockdale did. So one thing that I think is that I really love is just the fact that when you light a single candle, that flame can be seen in complete darkness by the average human eye for up to 1.6 miles away. And if you ask yourself, if there's a completely dark room, how much does it take to light up that room? One ray, one single ray brings light in. And sometimes that's how it is in our hearts. I love this quote by Barbara Kingsolver. She says, "Hope is a renewable option. If you run out of it, at the end of the day, you get to start over in the morning." So I like to sit inside of thinking that hope is something that we can choose. And we do have to get ourselves into a safe enough place to believe that. So sometimes surrounding yourself with, the very best of the things that you can choose, the very best people, the situations, whatever it is that, like last week, we talked about how impressionable we are, and what we surround ourselves with, and things that we choose to expose ourselves with, and the feelings that we choose to partake in contribute to that little ray of light coming in to a very dark room. And with that, I want to open up the floor to all of my guests that I have today. I've invited my listeners to a live podcast recording, and I just want to open it up and say, I'm so grateful that you all are here with me, and whatever questions you have, let's jump in. You can talk to me about the story. You can ask me about concepts, or you can ask me about your personal life and what's going on for you. I would love to hear.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two things from when you were reading in your journal that struck me. And the first is after someone who's gone through a divorce as an adult female in my early 40s, the mindset of a 15-year-old is mind-blowing to me. So I just want to recognize, like, I have a 15-year-old, and I just can't imagine just the mental capacity to go through that as a child, with a child. And I think even back then you were who you are. So you have just a natural talent and gift for observing and being present. And then the second thing I wanted to mention was, I think your journal entry said something about, I hope he looks back and realizes, like, refresh me, like what he lost, or what did you exactly say?
Let's see what I said here. Do you like how I started too? And I'm like, why me? Such a whiner, but it's hard to be anything else sometimes when you're in a really tough situation. Okay, let's see. I hope. Oh, yeah, it does say that. Okay, because at the beginning it says, I hope one day he will regret all of this. You know, he kind of says, like, he had the perfect daughter and the perfect wife. And, you know, that's a little stretch, but hello.
Right.
And then, and then I say, I hope one day he'll regret this.
Yeah. So that for me, listening to you read that you wrote that, I have a lot of people that I talk to who are going through divorces or have been through one. And I know I felt like we were worth it. Like, me and our family and our children were worth it. And I remember sending my ex-husband a message the day that I knew I had to get divorced, and just saying, just so you know, we were worth it. And I think it's really important to tell people going through stuff who wonder. I think sometimes people actually wonder, like, why weren't we worth it? And that's never the point. You were worth it. They just couldn't do that for whatever their reasons. And it really has nothing to do with you and what kind of person you or your family are, because you're worth it. And so I love to always remind people going through a divorce, you were worth it. Just because they didn't do what they needed to do to stay in your life doesn't mean that you weren't worth it. And that's super important to me for people to know.
I love that. Love that, Megan. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to add.
Okay. I love it. Anyone else?
There's a couple in the chat too.
Yes. Okay. My friend Allison, she says, my favorite thing is to notice progress when I've been going through a difficult trial. I've read back a year ago and noticed how much I've grown, even if it is still hard in the moment, and try to feel gratitude for what I've learned and how much better usually things are than a year ago. And I love that, Allison, so much, because I think just as looking back gives you perspective and gives you strength in the moment, it also gives you the idea to think, like, in a year, how would my perspective change? How would my perspective be different? So I love, sometimes that really helps us to check back in. And then Allison says this also, question, have you been able to forgive Jesse? How does he feel about you doing the podcast, and what is your relationship with him like now? Would you consider yourself to be friends? Oh, I love this question. And guess what? I haven't talked to him for a really long time. So let's see, help me do some math here. If that's 1994, I saw him at my niece Ashley's wedding, and we greeted and had a really good greeting. And there is so much more that comes out in the story that I kind of don't really want to ruin, that required a lot of forgiveness. And I remember, being on the phone with him and extending that forgiveness and knowing that forgiveness was something that I could give even when he didn't even ask for it or know he needed it. And that was a completely separate issue because he did feel really terrible that everything went down the way that it did. And it's almost like he had enough holes. I like to call them holes, or like a brain with Swiss cheese. Like he couldn't grasp like what was going on in the moment. And when we finally did get divorced, he was so emotionally like rocked, where I had processed it for a long time already. And, because I started to go through all of this, and and he was still trying to hold on to two worlds, and then once he finally saw that it wasn't going to happen and that I wasn't going to stay in that place, he emotionally processed that. But then there's something else that comes up later that did require a lot of forgiveness. And, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I did have to get a restraining order on him after our divorce. And so that really severed, any potential for a relationship. We did talk, about 2 years later, a couple of times. And then again, I saw him at my niece's wedding, maybe, gosh, how long has she been married? I want to say like maybe 7 years ago. I don't really know. That's kind of a shot in the dark. And we had a great greeting there, and, we gave each other a hug, and it was a very kind and good greeting. And I've definitely made peace. And I feel like that's a very important thing in life, because I know ultimately that it's not me that needs to judge him. It's not me that needs to be in a place to hold him accountable. I did what was right for me and my path, and then I was able to move on and move forward. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to entertain necessarily being friends, and he doesn't know about the podcast. And I also changed his name just to kind of protect him. And I'm not trying to air bad news about him. That is so not the point of the podcast. And it's interesting because like I said, a lot of the things that I write are devoid of the good that did happen during the time. I didn't record a lot of the good, and not very much of it was recorded that was good. But he just had a very cavalier way of making you laugh and making you like him. He was very charismatic, and that's why it also lasted as long as it did, obviously. So I don't know. Feel like it answers that question completely? Yeah, I kind of hope he doesn't find out about the podcast. I don't think it would necessarily be healthy for him to listen. But if he does and dares to kind of process all of that, I mean, my sister and I were talking today about how it's causing us to process things that we didn't really know. And we were having a really good conversation about that, things that, you just have to think about. Our brain has a tendency to remember at least I know my brain has a tendency to remember the very best of a situation. And going through my journal, I'm like, whoa, holy cow. Like, I know it was bad, but holy cow, you know what I mean? And I think, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, Kaisa, jump in here. Unmute yourself, and love to hear from you.
Hello.
Hi.
Sorry. I was
Good to
trying to find good to see you. I was trying to find a quiet room. My husband has golf playing, so I'm muting that. You may hear my daughter crying. She's tired. She's with my husband. Yeah. But I trying to collect my thoughts. I had them collected, but they tend to get jumbled.
We are right here. Just take a breath. You're fine. Yes.
So a few of the things that you said in your entry I found interesting, and a few of the things that you even said, I think it was after some of the advice that your dad had given you about writing it in your journal and recording how you feel when you're with him. I remember you gave me that exact same advice, like the exact same person. So it kind of hit a nerve for me because I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like your brain processes things differently when you're in the moment, like you said. And then when you have a second to step back, read it, think about it, reflect, you can process it in a better, healthy way, I think. Mm-hmm. But as it was said before, I'm not quite sure how at 15 you were able to be such a mature person about this, because me at 24 couldn't do that. But I am thankful that you went through what you went through and that you're willing to share for my own personal reasons, I guess. But I don't know what you want me. I don't know what you're comfortable with me sharing. So I'm trying to be vague.
So I'm comfortable with you sharing what you want to share because it's your part of the story. And a note on what we can do. I don't think any of us know what we can do until we're faced with it. And then we're surprising ourselves, and so I think that that's a little bit of grace for everybody to give themselves. I don't know that if I would have thought of myself like, oh, could you go through something at 15? You know what I mean? Like, I don't think I remember talking to a woman who I worked with at the grocery store, and she said to me, I don't know how you could ever go through losing someone so close to you, passing away. And I remember her telling her, you don't know what you can go through until you go through it. And her brother passed away a couple weeks later. And that proved to be something that she was like, wow, you really do surprise yourself when you see what you can go through. And we are so resilient, and we have to remember that we are very resilient people, and we get resourceful in our own ways, and we get people dropped into our life and in our path that help us, go through the things that we have to go through. Yeah. Go on, Kaisa.
Well, you were one of those people dropped in my path recently, and I'm thankful that I have the personality I do to reach out. So another thing that you had said in your journal entry was you hope that he'll look back and regret it. I had the exact same thought in my head, pertaining to him as well. I think that he at years ago hurt people because he was hurt. Hurt people. And as unfair as it is, it devastated a lot of people's lives, whether he knew or not. But it's just funny to me that you have, funny to me, not the right word maybe, but funny to me that you had those thoughts of, I hope that he will look back and be able to realize what he had. And I don't think that you meant it to be, oh, I hope that he'll look back and find out that he'll never have anything better or whatnot. I think that it was more, maybe I'm just using my own feelings, but for me, I guess it was more of I hope that one day he can tell himself why he was okay with the situation being the way it was. And then maybe one day I can understand. If he can be willing to express to himself why he was comfortable allowing the situation to happen, then maybe he can express it to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say, people can only function with what they've been given in life. And so sometimes we approach other people and expect them to function with full capacity that at least we have. And sometimes life is more about recognizing, that they are not functioning that way. And then we get to choose boundaries. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that boundaries are a very, very important thing to learn early on in every relationship, because they're different for every person and you have to be the one to set them, which is something that I have learned from you, that nobody else is going to set your boundaries. Everybody else is just going to walk all over them unless you set them and put them in place.
Amen.
And so it's your story, this story, it does hit very close to me. And I do almost get a comfort listening to it and listening to your journal readings, because as I've said, I've had a lot of the same feelings, though my situation being different from yours. But I am very sad that my sister has been taken away, that I never was able to meet her. I would go visit at the cemetery, but it's not quite the same. But I do know that she played an extreme role in protecting me as a young, little tiny human, that there is no way that I would have been able to be sitting here where I am without her being the guardian angel that I know she was. I think that with her pushing me is why I was able to reach out to you, because I truly don't know you. I mean, I don't. I know who you are. I know of you. I obviously know how you fit in, but I don't know you. And having all of those little random, maybe you should talk to Nisha. Maybe you should figure out what she's thinking and what she's doing, and if forgiveness has happened, because hearing that you were able to extend forgiveness to somebody that didn't ask for it, didn't know that they maybe needed it, possibly didn't deserve it, lots of different things, but yet your heart was big enough and your mindset was strong enough to be able to open yourself up and allow forgiveness to happen, knowing that it had nothing to do with the other party involved. It was strictly for you to be able to heal. And knowing that and seeing that and seeing the person that you are in spite of what has happened, it has given me a different perspective on how to look at it. It allowed me to see more of the guardian angel that I had, rather than the missing person that should have been there or could have been there but wasn't.
What's interesting is nothing could have gone down the way it went down had she not been in angel form.
Yeah, I agree. Wholeheartedly agree.
And so we see there's a bigger purpose. There's a bigger purpose. And I think when we talk about forgiveness, everyone really does deserve forgiveness, simply because you don't deserve to hold on to it.
Right.
You don't deserve to carry that around and feel like it's yours too. It's not yours. Yep. It's very simple.
They deserve forgiveness so that you can heal.
Yeah. And then if they participate in that forgiveness because they desire it, then that is completing the circle of forgiveness. But when you forgive because you choose to forgive, you can become whole, and you also know that you can trust a bigger plan, and that it's not yours to be the person judging. It's yours to hold the space for yourself to heal, and then you get to choose, based on how that forgiveness is received, what you want that to be part of your life or not continually. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. Because otherwise we end up as a victim. And we then attract everything into our life as a victim mentality.
And I sat in that spot for a long time with lots and lots of different situations. But I sat on that. played the pity party game. I played the why me, or just all of the different things. I fell victim to that. And I recently, I say recently, but it's been probably 5 or so years, was able to come out of that and realize that I could be a better person if I let go of that. I sat there for a long time. And then once I decided that forgiveness was more about me than letting them win, in my head, if I forgave them, they won. They won. I didn't have that leverage anymore. I couldn't say, oh, I don't forgive you. Like, no, like it was not about that.
Yeah.
And once I grew and I was able to understand, I was able to let it go and be a better person for it and open different connections. And even with the people that caused the pain, open connections. And it was very helpful just to be able to let things go. But none of that would have been able to really happen without being able to have a little bit of your advice. I'm grateful for your story. I'm grateful that you put it out there. I'm grateful that you're open with it. But yeah.
Well, I think that the timing of this project and the timing of your healing meeting together in a place was just, all from a bigger place.
It was all Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm convinced anyways.
Yeah. Pretty awesome. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
No, I don't think so. Not right now.
Okay. If something else comes up, then let me know. Who else? Okay. Anybody else want to pop up and have any questions or?
I just have one comment. I don't know why I'd never heard it phrased this way until recently, but have you guys heard God never wastes pain? You ever heard that comment?
That's beautiful.
I love that. I look at what's going on right now, hear other stories that I know of people, my own stories, and I just love that God never wastes pain. And I just think it's by divine design that you're doing this. It's by divine design that Kaisa has come in, and it's incredible. But if you think of God never wastes pain, it's the way it's supposed to be.
That's beautiful. I love that, Megan. Anyone else? Anything you want to ask or share?
I'll say, first of all, I completely agree with you, Megan. And I just love being a part of this conversation. Even just listening, my first initial question was already answered, which was all around forgiveness. And I think it's amazing that Kaisa's here as well. Just got teared up when she was talking. Also, one thing that really stuck out, and it's really just reiterating what you've already said, is just the people that you meet along the way or have in your path, like your father, our friends. We're not meant to go through life and through pain alone. And it's so important to share it. And just by you sharing your story, I know even for myself, sharing my own story, that I'm opening up more to doing that in the world and in a safe space, of course, but it's healing for us. It's healing for others, just to hear how our perspectives can change through time, really. And that's another thing that really struck home that you said, because I felt it in my own life, is when you're going through a really, really hard time in your life, but then you get to another side of it, which could take years, of course. But knowing that you got to the other side brings more hope. Like when you're going through it again, for me personally, Misha knows this, but I had a long fertility journey, just infertility and not being able to get pregnant, and then becoming a foster parent. And even though I went through 7 years of just questioning everything because I always felt like I was supposed to be a mother, questioning it all and then surrendering it to God, to just something bigger than myself. And then having all the signs and symbols show up to become a foster parent. And I can't imagine not being in my life right now with our little girl. But now is the question of, do we get to adopt her after 15 months together? Will I have to say goodbye, or will she be ours forever? And I definitely have hope, but it's sitting in this unknown every day. So every day I have to wake up, and I don't remember who said it before, but it was like, you have a chance every day to wake up and have new hope. Maybe that was you, Misha, or Yolanda.
That was that quote that said,
oh yeah,
I'll tell you what it says. It says, hope is a renewable option. If you run out of it at the end of the day, you get to start over in the morning.
oh, I love it so much.
Yeah.
I want to like put it on my wall because some days are really hard.
Yeah.
And you were telling the optimist story. I do feel like I'm an optimist as well. But it's also, I think it's so important to just feel all the feelings and process them. And then, okay, I tell myself that often. I wake up in the morning, it's a new day. What happened last night, however I was feeling, what happened yesterday. So many things resonate with what you were saying, even about people being where they are on their path. Like people not, maybe that's not exactly the way you said it, but basically you can't change somebody's, sorry, I don't remember how you said it, but
I don't remember what we said.
it was like, it's like, I have my own mindset. I have my own perspective on life, but somebody else, I'm thinking of, in my particular situation, being a foster parent and dealing with biological family, somebody coming from a completely different world and perspective than you. And having
that we don't know their background. We don't know what got them to their place and their right.
Yes. So having compassion for that and not trying to think that they're going to think how I think about the situation.
Exactly.
I remind myself of that often as well. So I just love what you're doing, Misha. And
thank you. I'm
grateful that we were able to connect and I get to be a part of it as well.
Same. And I was thinking about your story, and I'm thinking about how, sometimes as a parent and as you are rocking your child every day, sometimes we take those days for granted, and I don't know that you will, because I think every day that you're given with her, you look at as a gift. And I think that is one blessing that you have for your mindset, is to know that you get every day that you get it with her is a gift. Definitely. And just imagine if all of us could look at our lives with our children that way and stop, taking the days for granted. And so that's the challenge, right? It's just to be able to see the flip side of the hard, the flip side of our negative, the flip side of what we start to, fall into that negative spiral about, is then being able to recheck into what it is giving us.
Yes.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. So good. Okay. Anyone else? Any questions?
So I would just like to, it's sort of a question, but also a little bit of a comment, that in this journal reading and your description of it, I've heard you say a few times, like, I couldn't see what was going on. Like, we still had this observation of maybe hope, that it wasn't true what was happening. And, a little bit about my story right now, but, I am almost 68, and I look back, I didn't start telling the truth about my home until I was like 29, almost 30, where I had built a fantasy of, we're just fine. We're great. And my dad was an alcoholic, and my mom was beaten up, There was, my sister went through plate glass windows, and, there was so much trauma that I just didn't process. I didn't see. And now there are issues with my mother, and I never saw them. I never saw them. She's 91, 92. I knew she had issues with my sister, but I had taken the role of being the good daughter. And so I didn't see that, but I see it now because I'm not the good daughter.
I don't know that that's true. She's just recognizing her dad. And so her mom is feeling that.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's been happening for a while, but I guess I want to say that I think the fantasy, the way that we cope, is our way to survive the situations we're in, the very difficult ones that we don't have words for, we don't have a way to deal with, and that's how we get through it. I mean, how do you feel about it now, looking back, and you see that you were trying so hard to keep the threads together of the world that you had invented?
I think it's interesting because I think that we also come at life with whatever we've also been taught and modeled, right? And so I think I saw my parents and when you get married, you're committed and that's what you do. And so then you also assume that your partner is doing the same thing, and that even if stuff is hard, then that's what you do. You show up and you do that. And I think, if you think back to one of the experiences that I had with my dad when we went for that walk on the family reunion, and he kind of talked to me about how I had a choice, and he started to help me see that I had a choice. And that's just the only thing I can really remember from that conversation is an extreme feeling of love, and that he was on my side and that I had a choice. I remember starting to wake up to that at that point. Because before, I really felt like this is it. I'm in this, and so I think that it stems from what we've been taught, and then it takes time to sort of process a different idea of how we could see a different picture for us play out in front of us. Because sometimes until we can see something different in front of us, we can't even see, it's like we can't envision that option because, again, going back to the whole premise also of a lot of the things that we teach is that we're not here to live life as though it's coming to us. We get to create it and move forward. And we have to be shown that. That's something that we have to sort of wake up to, whether our parents teach it to us or if we learn it later on in life, that we get to form and create. And so much of the time we actually believe that we are here to take the hits of life or what's next around the corner, or what we think that the way we feel is subject to what's going on around us. And we don't always realize that we have so much more power than we think we do inside of that option. But yeah, I don't know. Did that completely answer your question, you?
No, it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good.
I just have loved listening to you talk about your dad. As you know, it inspired me to do my current episode, but also the interaction between you and your sister. I love when you share about that on your podcast.
Interesting, because I was having a conversation with her today, and there were some things that were coming up in her voice, and I was like, because she was like, should I be on there tonight? Because she kind of had something else that she was, going to be interrupted and different things. And, you can see her in the chat. She says, I have to go, but I love you so much. And, I just kind of asked her, is this okay? Because I didn't realize this was bringing up more for her. More memories and stuff to process and kind of go through. And she has her own questions of, why this and why that. And I just kind of said to her, I think maybe there's a a podcast just between you and I here, for people to hear. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful because I think that when we can understand what was going on for the other person, it just increases our compassion. And in such a beautiful way. Yeah. There's an incredible, crazy bond between us. I mean, Megan knows my sister and she's amazing. Both of my sisters are awesome. My younger sister was a little too young during this story to really be involved a lot, in the hard. We kind of sheltered her from a lot of the hard that was going on. She was definitely there, as a lover and just like that, but she was very young. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question, Misha.
Yeah.
My question is, so your parents, I'm a little envious of because of how they handled your situation. And I'm just curious how, after your divorce, how did you approach them, or did you, I guess, approach them and just say, look, like, how did you let me do this? Like, what? Like, you could have seen the writing on the wall that maybe I missed. Like, where was your head at? Like, how did they? I mean, I know in the stories that you've said that your dad kind of took that back seat more or less once you hit that point, because it was your choice, it was your deal. And I'm just curious as how that affected your relationship after the divorce and after the separation of everything. Was it just, how did it affect?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I never had like any blame in my heart at all, just because originally, if you look at the formula of what they used, they encouraged me to make my choices and to live my life for me and not to sit inside of, allowing me to be subject to someone else's decisions. And with that comes responsibility. And I think that they just did such a good way of like teaching me and walking me through that. I always just felt like they were right there by my side. They were just there. They were just there all the time. And my dad shared with me things occasionally that he, learned along the way, like how he had that overwhelming moment where he understood that I would need to look back on my life and know that I made my decisions for myself and not that they were made for me. And he really taught me that. And then he taught me and really broke down, these are your choices and I'm right here. These are your choices and I'm right here. So I never felt like, I feel like my parents, on the contrary, saved me. I feel like they let me learn and they let me see and they let me go through it. And then they were the softest pillow that I could land on, that I could come home to, that I could talk with. The meetings we had in our basement, in our family room in our basement, were so beautiful. If I could go back to that time and see myself sitting there sometimes with my mom and my dad and my sister, and just kind of walking through some of the things that we would talk about, and kind of, starting at this point when I moved home, especially, to figuring out life, to figuring out what happens over the next 6 months. Those were the most beautiful. And it just always was, it's kind of like, I think, what people experience, in therapy. Because when you just can talk about it, my dad would always say, if we always had, a really good friend, then, 80% of us wouldn't need our therapists for 80% of the time, and I really do believe that, because sometimes in therapy, sure, we if you have a good therapist, you learn strategies and tactics and you learn. Okay. But sometimes therapy is really just, you are showing up and just talking and processing. And so sometimes when we have an environment where we can truly do that, and the thing is about this story is it shows us what's possible in all of your families. You have the potential to do that with all of your people, to sit and be real and just say, how can I walk with you through what you're going through? No judgment. My dad, I remember him saying, Mish, no matter what you choose, we're going to support you. You choose to stay with him, we're going to support you. You choose to leave him, we're supporting you. We believe in your decisions. We are here for you. And I think that's what I love Allison in the chat. She says, move forward is my favorite phrase. You have a way with words and sharing things, what you've learned. And I don't remember saying move forward, but apparently in this conversation we did. And that's true. That's beautiful. And Allison also says, I love that Taylor lives on through sharing her beautiful soul with us. And that's true too. We're going to see so much more of that as we step into kind of like the next chapter. It's really cool. Did that answer you, Kaisa?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Meg.
So I was just thinking about all the people that are being talked about. And in my head, I'm thinking of them as players, in the story. But when Kaisa was talking about, this little bit of like, oh, I wish how your parents handled things, and how they were with you. And when I was in my early 20s and we were first friends, I had the opportunity to go home with you for a visit. And I will never forget the way your family greeted you. I mean, your parents just huge open arms, like as if you were like a long lost cousin, Mish. And they just held you like heart to heart, soul to soul. And I remember observing this moment between a parents and a child. And they hugged me like I was special too, but I didn't have that growing up, and I have lovely parents. But I remember thinking and observing that and thinking, I want that. I want that in my home someday. And I'm very affectionate with my kids. And I just, you're talking about these sessions in the basement. I've been in that basement. I've been in the presence of your dad, when he was still here, and your mom, and how amazing that is. And then also talking about how parents can support a child when they're observing all these things that are really, really wrong. I feel like I have a similar situation going on in my home. And with my counselor, I'm like, how do I do this? How do I try to be excited about things that feel exciting when I'm worried that they're going to crash? And he said, you just show up for your people. And then when it all falls apart, you're there for a soft landing. And I just love that advice, that we just love our people for whatever they're going through. And then when it all comes crashing down, even if we could see it, we're just there with no judgment and just to be a soft landing and love on them. And so, I'm as a mother, I'm taking away things like that from this story of how you were treated.
Megan, I love that you shared that. And those are such tender memories, because I remember, going home with you. And I think it's really important to note, my parents were incredible, and someone might get the idea that they were perfect by listening to these things. And I think that we need to remember that my dad really did go through these things, and it's really just because he spent time thinking about what I might need. He by no means was perfect. Neither was my mom at all, because everybody has flaws. But look at the amazing ways that we as humans with flaws can show up for each other. And that is what we see. And when we make love the very first thing, when we make love happen in our home, when I would come home, very often my dad would be ready with a song cued that he thought was like an awesome dance song. And when I walked in the door, man, it was party. because he knew I loved to dance. You know, when I came home, we danced. It's just, he knew that's what I loved. He didn't cue a song necessarily when Shelly came home or when April came home. They all danced with us. Heck yeah. We all laid it down. But for April, the important things was, showing up in her sports. And for Shelly, it's just everybody had such a different way. For Shelly, he knew it was important that she was seen and recognized. And he would order things for her at the gas station before he went into work and have them left. The attendant would say, "Oh yeah, your dad came through. He got you this. Here you go." And she would go about the rest of her day going, "My dad thought about me today." He just simplest little things like turning off the TV when she came in the room so that he could give her his full attention. Those are the things. And then look how our brain remembers the good. And just don't forget that every ounce in every way that you show up, that you have such a potential and so much power for good. It's just amazing and beautiful. I cannot tell you what it means to me, honestly, that you guys showed up for me tonight in this space. Just when I started to tell this story, Adele's song, Easy on Me, just came out. And it was like, I was just a child, I didn't get the chance to choose. Go easy on me, And I just kept thinking like, okay, world, like, we got this, right? We got this, right? Like, we're telling this story for a reason, for a purpose, because we can inspire and we can move and we can show people that even in the darkest times, like, beauty can come. And looking back, we can dissect all the little things and bring about hope and love. And we can encourage each other to go home and just be such a force for good in our lives. So just thank you so much. And I hope that you're seeing every single week that you do have power when you check in. And when you check into the ways that you're thinking about things, when you're thinking about the people in your life and in your own mind and what the thoughts you're having day to day. Because you have so much power simply by what happens up here. And with that, I'll see you next week.
So much love. That conversation was so fulfilling for me to sit with my audience. And so because of that, I want to open up something new. And this might be something that takes off, and it might be something that just lasts for a minute. But I had the idea of how neat it would be to have conversations inside of the Facebook group. So there's a Facebook group called Mindset Check on Facebook. It's a private Facebook group. And if you have any desire to hop in there and have a conversation and talk about anything from the podcast, walk through anything in your life, I'm here and I would love to do that with you. So, and just also in the belief that our stories help others. And I think from the perspective of seeing all of the people that we listened to today and how each of them are going through different things in their life, but when we talk about the same underlying idea that we all have struggle and that we're all here to help each other go through it, that gives us strength. So it's with that I'm opening this up. So if you want to do that, reach out to me. I would love to hear from you. And if you want me to also just share your story anonymously at the end of the podcast, I'm totally open to that also. You can email me at hello@myfriendmisha.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at myfriendmisha, or you can also private message me on Facebook. My name is spelled Mesha. Also, please remember that if you are receiving and resonating with this podcast, it's possible that other people in your life would too. And from the very bottom of my heart, I would appreciate it if you do share. Also, if you subscribe, if you just click that little button, it will help you have reminders to kind of come back to the Mindset Check podcast so that you can get encouragement to help you through your day. Thank you so much for joining us today and listening to this awesome podcast recording. It was an amazing journey. And today I just want to leave you with this quote from Christopher Reeve, and he says, "Once you choose hope, anything is possible." Until next time, my friends.